Buenas tardes and welcome to the Connect Charla, where we will address the digital divide in our communities, and especially after that divide got even wider during this pandemic. It seemed like an epidemic. The COVID pandemic hit the Latino community with tremendous force, health-wise, economically, and in education. And I've said that there is no vaccine for the educational crisis, or as our opening Charla oradora, Jessica Rosenworcel, has put it, the homework gap, which has impacted the ability of our youth to learn or even prepare for their future careers. It's going to last a lot longer than what we think is the pandemic's last stand. Our ability to also access technology is even bigger than just being educated. It's impacting our ability to access health services, including signing up for vaccinations or locating where to get them. It's hindering our ability to look for and apply for jobs, which are almost all online these days. Our ability to mobilize and organize and informize, which is a made-up word I have, to get information out during a historical social justice movement. It is being impacted by the digital divide. Even dating for the single friends out there. It seems like you got to be online to even get a date these days. So for minority and rural communities during this digital divide, it's been one of the most pressing educational and future of work issues before Congress. And the broadband infrastructure plan seeks to provide affordable, reliable, high-speed internet to every American. And that is good for America now, and that is good for America tomorrow. But I want to bring it back to what this is all really about. One of our first oradores today is a young man in Dallas that Chair Rosenworcel and I have gotten to know, named Adan Gonzalez. And Adan is the son of Mexican immigrants with no fixed broadband at home. When he was in high school, Adan would lean on a restaurant's wall on his cell phone to fill out his college applications and do his homework. That flash access to Wi-Fi allowed him the opportunity, and as Latinos or any other community, all we want is opportunity, to end up receiving scholarships to Georgetown University, subsequently to grad school at Harvard University. And after graduating there, he went to Columbia University's prestigious teaching school. Obviously, he couldn't get into the University of Maryland, but I'm glad he got into his backup schools. And he was the first in his family to graduate from middle school, high school, or college. Chair Rosenworcel and I visited Adan in Oak Cliff, Dallas, and witnessed him giving back to his community firsthand through his education and leadership academy called Puede Academy. And we were there, and this was, I think, something like 7 or 8 years ago, but we were there when he actually set up the academy. And the first thing he did was set up internet service, because most of the 500 students and parents that he helps do not have broadband at home. So their ability, like Adan's, to build a better future will depend on reliable internet service. And 8 years later, they're dealing with the exact same thing that Adan was dealing with in high school. America needs more success stories like Adan's, but we need productive broadband to overcome the educational crisis and move forward as a more educated, more prepared for the workforce, healthier and more connected as a community and as a country. So I want to thank AT&T for their support in this space. I want to thank the Hispanic Technology and Telecommunications Partnership, HTTP, for their leadership. And I also appreciate Teach for America and MANA, which is a national Latino organization, for their partnership over these years. And now let's hear from our friend and a true luchadora battling the digital divide and the homework gap, Federal Communications Commission acting chairwoman, Jessica Rosenworcel. And by the way, you need a calculator to add up all of those words that are in her title now, along with her name. But Chair Rosenworcel believes that the future belongs to the connected. She works tirelessly to promote greater opportunity, accessibility, and affordability in communication services in order to ensure that all Americans get a fair shot at 21st century success. She believes strong communication markets can foster economic growth and security, and that's important, and security, enhance digital age opportunity, and enrich our civic life, wrapped all into this fight that she's been doing for a long, long time. From fighting to protect net neutrality to ensuring access to internet for students caught up in that homework gap we discussed. Jessica has been a consistent champion for connecting all. She's the leader in spectrum policy, developing new ways to support wireless services from Wi-Fi to video and the Internet of Things. She's also responsible for developing policies to help expand the reach of broadband to schools, libraries, hospitals, and households across the country. And I just have to tell you, a lot of these were ideas she was throwing out 8, 9 years ago when she was starting in these positions. And to see it actually be tangible and something that we're moving on, and I'm not kidding you, she was throwing these things out there a very long time ago. So I just want to thank you for your vision. I think it's underrated that someone in your position actually has vision and not just the duties of carrying things out, policies out. You have to have vision first. She's been named as one of Politico's 50 Politicos to watch and profiled by InStyle magazine in a series of celebrating women who show up, speak up, and get things done. Chair Rosenworcel brings over 2 decades of communications policy experience and public service to the FCC. She's repping Hartford, Connecticut, and Wesleyan University, and as well as New York University School of Law. Please welcome our friend, Chair-elect Rosenworcel.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for those ridiculously kind words. And also, thank you, Antonio. The Hispanic Heritage Foundation, I mean, you were one of the earliest groups I reached out to talk about this. And you told me that you knew a kid in Dallas, and his narrative really propelled us forward. And so I am forever grateful for how you validated my hunches. You introduced me to people who are struggling. And here we are a decade later, and we're finally making change. So let me talk a little bit about that. Oh my goodness, it's been quite a year. We have all hunkered down, we've masked up, and we have moved so much of modern life online. It's work, it's school, it's healthcare, it's everything. And yet we know in the United States, not everyone can get there. 1/3 of our households still don't subscribe to consistent and reliable internet access. And as we exit this pandemic and this economic crisis, let's use this moment to fix it. Let's use this moment to commit to getting 100% of our households connected to broadband in this country, no matter who they are, where they live, or where they came from. That's what I want to get done. That's a focus of mine at the Federal Communications Commission. And bonus, with this pandemic, we've been able to convince Congress that this really needs to be a focus of the legislative body too. And so very quickly, we've got 2 new programs that are important to get the unconnected connected and have all sorts of value for the Latino community, who we know over-index on smartphone access to the internet, but under-index on home broadband. All right, so let me quickly just hit the highlights of those 2 programs. The first is one that is open right now. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit. And there are a lot of people on this call doing amazing things to help us get the word out about that. It provides $50 a month in support to low-income households to get broadband. So if a household is on SNAP, Medicaid, free and reduced lunch program at school, has a Pell Grant, the odds are you qualify. If there's someone who lost a job in the last year, the odds are you qualify. We have a website, getemergencybroadband.org. You can sign up. We've got more than 1,000 broadband providers nationwide participating. It is the nation's largest broadband affordability program ever. And for validating who you are, you can have a social security number, but you could also have a driver's license, a taxpayer identification. In other words, we've got all different ways to bring people in, because we want to make it as simple as possible to get households connected. So that's our first program, Emergency Broadband Benefit. It's historic. We've never had a broadband affordability program this big in the United States. And this second program helps solve what I've called the homework gap. You know, the kids who have broadband access at school, but when they go home, there's no internet. They can't do their homework. And so they resort to things like going to the fast food restaurant and doing the schoolwork with the side of fries. They resort to sitting in the school parking lot and capturing the free Wi-Fi signal just to do their homework. And during this pandemic, these were the kids who were locked out of the virtual classroom. We've got to figure out how to get every child in this country online again, no matter who they are or where they live. And so now we have a new emergency connectivity fund that will help every school and library in this country get funding for Wi-Fi hotspots, computers, devices, modems, routers. The goal is to get every child connected at home, to leave no child offline. And we are going to open up a window for schools and libraries to apply for that by the end of June. So we've got two programs. When you add them up together, it's $10 billion to get low-income communities online. And I think our superpower right now is making these projects work and getting the word out. And that's where you all come in, because I can keep on preaching, but I also know that if I can answer your questions and get you the information you need, so many people on this call are trusted in the communities they work with, and you can help us reach the unconnected, get them online, and get them on broadband, because it's not just a technology, it's really a platform for opportunity in modern life.
Thank you so much for that. It's so powerful. Again, having heard that you had a vision to enact some of these policies so many years ago, and then all of a sudden see it come to fruition. I just can't tell you how wonderful that is to see that in Washington, where things move at a glacial speed. And I've always talked about the importance of impatience in everything we do. And you have demonstrated that impatience with a little bit of savvy and patience thrown in there. But ultimately, you've always had a sense of urgency with everything you've done. I appreciate that so much. And now I have the privilege of introducing my sister, a constant partner, a source of guidance and encouragement, Maria Cardona. Maria has more than 2 decades of experience in the community affairs, government politics, and public relations arenas. She's an advocate for some of the most major issues affecting the Latinx community, such as comprehensive immigration reform. When are we going to see that? Voting rights protection. Hopefully we get that back. And access to affordable health care. Maria is a principal at the Dewey Square Group, founder of Latinovations, the Latin Strategies Practice for DSG, and currently serves as a CNN and CNN Espanol political commentator, where she throws down with anyone in front of her, as well as the host of the Maria Show. And there's an exclamation point, so I'm reading it right, Maria Show on El Rey Network. She is recognized among the most influential Latinx in the country, and is one of the most sought after communications and media strategies, which you can clearly see because she's actually sitting in an actual throne right now on her Zoom. And we are so thrilled to have her hosting our Connect Charla. She is repping Duke University and Columbia, but not the college, but the country. Please welcome Maria Cardona.
Tony, gracias. My brother, mi hermano, you and I go back. I can't even remember when we met, because I feel like I've known you forever, hermano. So thank you for all you do. You do amazing work every single day to lead our community to where we need to go. I want to thank acting commissioner, chair of the commission, and should be chair, not just acting, my dear friend Jessica Rosenworcel, who I hear you when you say that Tony was one of the first ones you reached out to. Because I got to say, you reached out to me also early on, and I was very impressed with your effort. It was true. You weren't just talking the talk. You have walked the walk from the very beginning. That's why we all consider you such a close and reliable and authentic ally. So thank you so much for everything that you are doing. And I'm just thrilled to be able to moderate the charla today. We have so many distinguished guests who are going to be able to speak about the importance of broadband from their own very unique and personal perspectives. And that's what I think this conversation needs. It needs authenticity. It needs originality. It needs to hear from the people to whom broadband affects, or the lack of broadband affects them every single day in so many ways. And that's what we're going to hear about today. So I just want to say a couple of words before I turn it over to a very distinguished group of speakers. You know, what's most striking to me about the current debate on the closing of the digital divide is that in the midst of so much partisan fighting on so many other issues, and Tony is right, you know, I throw down with Republicans on so many of these issues almost every day, but broadband access is actually not one of them. And that should make us all proud, and it should be the one thing, or one of the, hopefully one of more things that bring us together as a country, because we all see the need for it. And we see it, in fact, in the policies that are being put forward. The Biden administration put forward a plan that calls for $100 billion for universal broadband. Democrats then came out with their own plan calling for $80 billion. Republicans then followed with a plan matching or wanting to do similar with $65 billion, a little bit less, but it's still a hefty sum in terms of the kind of investment that we need to make as a country. And so all three sides in few months, the White House, congressional Republicans, congressional Democrats, they've all come together on a number that they think will get us to universal broadband. So I think the reason they've come together is obvious. The harm from the digital divide knows no partisanship, right? It does not distinguish between people who are either Republican or Democrats. It crosses the country. It cuts across party lines. It cuts across communities. It affects rural communities and small towns in a lot of the traditionally red states. It's a problem in large urban communities as well. The lack of broadband is also a huge issue in tribal communities. So for the Latino community, which is what we all know so well, it is also a tremendously huge problem. And it's not just in urban areas, because Latinos are everywhere. We have seen that, we know that, we live that each and every single day. And so here's just a little fact. The median age of America's 61 million Latinos is young. It's only about 30 years old. We all know this, but it's something that we as leaders in the Latino community should be talking about more broadly to everyone that will listen. That's about the youngest of any of America's ethnic groups. And so add to that the fact that the Latino population is growing in so many rural communities. And again, that's not something that you hear readily. We know that Latinos have big population numbers in urban centers, New York, Los Angeles, but you rarely hear that we are also in so many of the rural communities. But it makes sense, because so many of our frontline workers, that is where they are working, in our rural communities. So that is where we need access to broadband, and that is where we see that it is a tremendously huge problem. So for us, the digital divide means huge numbers of Latinos, especially young Latinos, as the acting chair was talking about the homework gap. They don't have broadband to complete their homework. And that is going to set us back, I think, decades from the standpoint of having the kind of preparation that our kids need to be successful in college and then in their careers. So this is creating serious long-term problems for the Latino community and for the country. We all know as the Latino community goes, so goes the country, especially as our numbers continue to grow. During the past year, students of color and those living in poverty areas have been hit much worse than others in the education opportunities that are available to them. So I'm going to leave it there, because I think we have really set the stage for how much of a problem this is, but we also see that there can be a solution had if we all work together. And so Chair Rosenworcel, we all look forward to working with you to making those solutions come to fruition for the benefit of all of our communities. And of course, you know, since this charla is for Latinos, specifically for the Latino community. So I'm gonna start introducing our special guests who are gonna be talking about this from their own unique standpoints. And I wanna encourage everyone, if you have a question for us, please share everyone in the chat, because we wanna make sure that you are addressing everyone so that we're able to see your comments. And then at the end, if we have time for questions, we will be taking those questions. But so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first guest speaker, Adan Gonzalez. Adan is the young leader that Tony mentioned and that Ms. Rosenworcel also knows of. And he is the executive director of the Puede Network. And I'm excited for everyone to hear Adan's story. Adan, welcome. And thank you so much for joining us.
Buenas tardes. Thank you, Maria, for the kind introduction. And obviously, I've seen my brother Tony and Jessica. We miss you in Dallas. We still have some chicken. My dad's grilling it. It is a Friday. But in short, as I'm here sitting, it's always still feels bittersweet. I always like to say that my success is based off my community's failure. And that's an idea of challenging the status quo and challenging the system. At the end of the day, we're all part of a system. And literally today, 10 years ago, I was sitting at the curb at McDonald's applying to college and scholarships, schools and foundations that I couldn't even pronounce their name. And at the end of the day, it was just this idea and hope that a college education was going to allow me to better serve my community and at the same time provide a better life for my family. Both of my parents are immigrants from León, Guanajuato, Mexico. And I share that because at the end of the day, in all of our conversations, it's important to ground and understand the belief and perspective that we have to respect the human capital that exists in our community. But for far too long, we're always celebrating the resiliency and tenacity of our kids like me who, unfortunately don't have access to all the resources to take advantage of an education. And what that means now, so again, I started off 10 years ago, and it took a pandemic to open the eyes of many people around the country of the reality where having access to technology is one obstacle. Now, the other obstacle many educators are facing is being able to educate and empower kids to be able to use the technology. That's a whole nother conversation. But today, I think about the positive stuff where you think you have in mind. I think Tony mentioned 6, 7, 8 years ago when Jessica and Tony came to my backyard. And when you guys come again, now we have a little small center. So we're moving up in this world. But the idea is the concept and the DNA of the culture that we have in our Pueblo community is the same. There's kids who are hungry for an opportunity, and parents that are sacrificing every day. And that's at the end of the day, what does it mean, right? So when we talk about the pandemic and for my kids and their parents, they needed guidance, how to take advantage of the amazing supports that, having access to broadband internet, having how to even learning how to navigate those conversations, who to call. That in itself is where us grassroots community leaders come in place, where when there's resources available to the community, we still have a responsibility to be able to connect these resources to those people who need them. And I think overall it's going to take all of us. And we always talk about it takes a village. And today, even I most recently, right now, Tony sent the dozens of laptops to here in Dallas to support our coding program. Like you're talking about kids are going to be in the hood. We're from Oak Cliff, South Oak Cliff to be specific, where we're always talking about the violence and drugs, but we're going to have kids that were coding in the backyard. Now they're going to be coding in the AC in our little small center that we have. But it's possible because, there's people like Jessica doing the movement, the policy changes and advocating and challenging the system. But then you have people like Tony who are saying, okay, that's great, but we also need the resources. And then someone like me that comes in to connect them. And that at the end of the day, that's my message. Where if a kid 10 years ago that literally had no idea about college and the opportunities that one can obtain through an education, I learned that it granted me my freedom and that responsibility to understand issues and walk with the community to find solutions. Because at the end of the day, everyone that we're trying to serve have dreams and talent. What they need is people, us leaders, to be able to create those opportunities and meet them where they are. So again, Tony, Jessica, and everyone on the call, thank you for the work. I know maybe I'll blame my age. I always feel like we're barely starting, but I stand on your shoulders of giants, and it gives me the energy. So thank you, and I look forward to having you guys back here in Oak Cliff very soon. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be able to share that, there is a community who needs the resources, but we're so loyal and so grateful that when you invest in us, oh my God, the results that you're going to get back are endless. So thank you again. And que todos pasen buenas tardes.
Thank you so much, Adan. Wow, your story is just so inspirational. And what you said at the beginning is so compelling and frankly kind of heart-wrenching, that your success is based on your community's failure, but I don't think it's your or our community's failure. I think it's the collective failure of the country and society and the government. And I know that that's what everyone here is trying to help solve for. So thank you for your voice. Thank you for focusing your success on the problems that you know still exist and that you are trying to again, help solve for. So we appreciate you, Adan. It's my pleasure to now introduce a dear hermana of mine. Amy Hinojosa is the president and CEO of MANA, a Latina organization. And Amy has been a leader in the tech space and the broadband space and the telecommunications space for a very, very long time. Amy, welcome to the Connect Charla, and we are so appreciative of your voice. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's always great to be with you and to be among so many friends. Tony and the Hispanic Heritage Foundation have really been leaders, in this space, and we're always so happy to, be a part of it, to connect and to bring the Latina perspective to this conversation. It's also wonderful to be here with Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel. And, it's so funny to say Acting Chairwoman because that almost feels like a passive state, to be an acting chairperson. And, everyone on this call should know that Jessica Rosenworcel has been a champion on these issues and a champion for our Latino communities, because she has never hesitated to call in our organizations and really put all hands on deck to answer the needs in our community. And she really feels the urgency of the issue. And so what I'd like to do is kind of pull the conversation back a little bit, because we all know what a desperate situation, the world went into when the COVID pandemic started. But I want to rewind us a little bit pre-pandemic, right? Because pre-pandemic, the digital divide and connectivity were issues for our community, and they were huge issues, because at that time, approximately 40% of Latino households did not have internet access, and 25%, so 1 in every 4 households, only had a mobile device for connectivity, right? So when you look at that in terms of how we were connecting with the world, how our communities were connecting with the world, the internet wasn't our first source, for getting information, right? And we rely on, word of mouth. We rely on our communities. This is what MANA is built on, this idea that women in our community are connectors, sources of information, trusted sources, and that we share information as we can, right? But when, we look at how, 1 in every 5 women in the United States is Latina. The top 6 occupations for Latinas are maids and housekeepers, cashiers, customer service representatives, secretaries and administrative assistants, janitors and building cleaners, and retail salespeople, right? This is not a surprise to anyone on this call. And we know that Latinas still only make 54 cents on the dollar for every dollar that a white man earns, right? So when you look at that, for far too many of our families, the cost of home internet service or a device was way out of reach, right? So we were already looking at it as something that was in a different stratosphere for our community. And as advocates, we knew that was a problem that we needed to bridge the digital divide on, right? That's the divide we were trying to conquer at that time. So then when you talk about COVID hitting, and immediately we all go into lockdown and we're dependent absolutely on the internet, think about how in the dark our families were in more ways than one. Immediately, right? We didn't have access to information about health. We didn't have access to information about our schools. Our kids couldn't go online. And in that time when parents started to become teachers, right? They had to be the proctors for their kids going online for school. We had a situation where even if our parents could be home with their kids, they didn't know the first thing of how to even access the internet, right? So we were facing a digital literacy gap on top of that. So in many of our homes where we have our kids who are translators for their parents, from English to Spanish and translating any information that comes home, they then were the teachers for digital literacy for their parents too. We were putting a heavy, heavy burden on our children, even if we could get them connected, right? So on top of that, if they weren't able to get to school, they were in effect dropouts. When we go back to school in the fall, we're going to see how many of our families really were just unaware of everything that was going on around them just because they simply didn't have access, right? And, the real world implication here, a recent analysis by GoodRx found that states with a higher portion of households without internet access tend to have lower vaccination rates. So if we put those two things, that our community is not connected and we have the lowest vaccination rates in the country, you don't have to be a genius to put those two things together and see why. And so our community is really in an urgent suffering situation right now. And we're only beginning to see the amount of devastation that's going to come out of this. So for me, as an advocate, right, and as I love this particular group that Tony and the Hispanic Heritage Foundation always pull together, because everyone always wants to know, what can I do? I feel kind of helpless. I see these things going on. I see my community suffering. What is my place in figuring out the solution, right? And getting to that end goal of making sure that our communities are taken care of and they have the essential needs of internet connection in the same way that their needs are met in terms of clean water and food to eat, right? This is the importance that we're talking about for these issues. And so, the first thing is going to be share that information. You are connectors. If you're on this call, you are a connector. You are a person who is trusted in your community, who is trusted in your family. So you need to go and make sure that they have this information. You know who in your family has internet access and doesn't. You know who in your community has access or doesn't. You can share this information with them and help them get connected immediately. This emergency benefit is there to help anyone who qualifies, and the qualification range is wide. And make sure that everyone understands that it doesn't matter your status, your immigration status or mixed status in your family, you can qualify to get this benefit. The important thing is to make sure everyone is connected. And the second thing is that while these emergency funds are available, they're not unlimited and they're not permanent. So we're looking at plans, and trying to work with Congress to make sure that this is something that can be implemented. Because look, we saw pre-pandemic, our community wasn't connected. We need to make sure that there are avenues for them to have help from the government to stay connected, because it can be a matter of life and death. And so you can contact your member of Congress, you can email, you can make a phone call. It's very, very simple. You can find out by your zip code and just let them know we need to have a permanent broadband benefit solution in place for the health and safety and education of our communities. And so I think that's my challenge to you as I leave the conversation, is to say, look, you have it in the palm of your hands to support your community and to really push for the changes that are needed to make sure that we're all on equal footing. The Adan Gonzalez's of the world are worth it. When you see the power that connectivity can have in the life of kids who are hungry to learn, you feel the same urgency that we should all feel to make sure that these things become a reality.
Amy, thank you so much for that passionate appeal, and then also for your direct call to action. That is something that we all need to hear, because that tells us and reminds us that we have this power, we have the voices, we have the platforms to speak for those who don't. So thank you for doing that every single day. One of the things that you said early on as you were speaking just really hit me hard. And it was that when the pandemic hit, our community was literally in the dark. And you're right about that. And I think that what we're all looking to do here in terms of more connectivity, making sure that everyone has broadband, can really avoid that in the future. Because I'll tell you one thing, this pandemic that we suffered through this past year and a half is not going to be the last one. And so we need to be prepared. So thank you again for everything that you do to help us do just that. So next up, I would like to introduce Alejandro Rourke, who is the Executive Director of HTTP, the Hispanic Telecommunications and Telecom Partnership. Alejandro, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Maria, and thank you, Antonio. Andres, we can go to the next slide. Throughout the course of the global health crisis, COVID-19 really exposed, as we have heard, the depth of the digital divide and the important and essential role that broadband plays in sustaining critical aspects of our everyday lives. As COVID infections rose, so did the digital fault lines between those who have an at-home internet connection and those who do not. If we want to go to the next slide, we all saw this picture, which went viral, of two Latina students attempting to do their homework in the parking lot of Taco Bell as in-person classes were canceled and moved entirely online. Next slide, please. We also saw, pictures of Latinos who faced some of the largest job losses due to the pandemic. Specifically, as Amy mentioned, Latino women many of whom work in the service industry and whose jobs disappeared overnight. We saw them standing in long lines in order to apply for unemployment benefits. Latinos, along with other communities of color who experienced severe harm by the economic fallout of the pandemic, accounting for 23% of the initial job losses, even though we only make up 18% of the total US population. Women in general accounted for 100% of the US job losses in December of 2020, and Latino women specifically accounted for 45% of those job losses. Next slide, please. As vaccines started to become available, we began seeing pictures like this of empty vaccination sites, which were located predominantly in Latino neighborhoods. We know now it was either because we were being targeted by misinformation about the vaccine, had limited availability to resources to conduct our own research, or because the primary way that anyone could get a vaccine in the early stages was by making an appointment online through outdated government websites. Each of these pictures tell the story of what happens when Latino households don't have access to reliable, high-speed internet at home. The two little girls could have continued their classwork at home. The people who had to wait in long lines and expose themselves unnecessarily to the virus could have enrolled for unemployment benefits online and used the internet as a resource to learn new skills or find another job in their area. And Latino households with internet connection would have had much easier access to credible information about the vaccine, or to be able to navigate the sometimes complicated government websites that have allowed them to make a vaccination appointment early on. Next slide, please. The families that were able to withstand some of the harshest impacts of the global health crisis were those that had a reliable broadband connection at home. And as we dive deeper into this conversation, I think that it's important for us to understand the digital divide by the numbers. Next slide, please. In their most recent findings published this year, Pew Research found that 65% of Latino households had a broadband connection at home, compared to 81% of white households. They also found that having an internet connection at home correlates directly with the average household income of the family. Those earning less than $50,000 a year are less likely to have a broadband subscription. I think it's also worth noting that the median household income for Latino households in 2019 was $56,000, and that number went down significantly in 2020. They also showed that Latino living in rural areas, about 3.2 million of us, in fact, were even less likely to have either the broadband infrastructure available to us, or the broadband that was available to us wasn't offered at an affordable price. Next slide, please. So really, that brings us to what is the impact of this broadband gap? And the impact is that Latino communities overall tend to be smartphone dependent, meaning that we have a cell phone, but not an at-home broadband connection. And not surprisingly, that trend is also directly correlated with a family's household income. Lower income households are more likely to rely on a cell phone as their primary access point to the internet. And I think that it's also important to mention that these numbers show that someone in their household has a cell phone and has access, not that every member of that household has their own device and a data plan. Next slide. So it's not surprising that the primary issue stalling broadband adoption at home for Latinos is the price. In fact, the majority of smartphone dependent respondents cite affordability as the #1 reason for not having an at-home broadband connection. Next slide. So what's the impact, right? What the impact is that when our families have limited access to the internet and limited speeds, our community in turn has limited opportunities to learn digital skills, which results in limited possibilities. And those are possibilities across the board in education, in health, and economic mobility. And as Chairwoman Rosenworcel mentioned in her remarks, the FCC has just launched a new program called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, which helps Latino households subscribe to an at-home internet service for the first time, or to help cover the cost of an existing service. The Emergency Broadband Benefit offers a discount paid directly to the internet service provider of your choice, up to $50 a month, as well as a one-time discount of up to $100 that can be used towards the purchase of a laptop, a tablet, or a desktop computer. HTTP worked with Congress and the Federal Communications Commission to ensure that all Latino families were able to access this important benefit, even mixed status families, as long as one member of our household, like Amy mentioned, like Commissioner Rosenworcel mentioned, has an I-10 number or who qualifies for free or reduced school lunch. Next slide. We see this not just as an on-ramp to digital connectivity, but as an important opportunity to reach new possibilities. But like Amy mentioned, we need your help. We need everyone watching, everyone connected to a local community. We need local community organizations to join us in spreading the word. And that's why, in partnership with organizations like MANA, like the Hispanic Heritage Foundation, like the United States Chamber of Commerce, like LULAC, like Hispanic Federation, we are working together, and we launched EBB Para Mí, which is an online digital resource that's offered in both English and Spanish that helps our communities navigate how to enroll in not just the program, but how to navigate, because we have to remember, these are all communities that don't have access to the internet yet, so they have limited kind of digital proficiency. So it's one thing to be able to verify your eligibility, but then it's like, how do you go from not having any internet service at home to understanding how to choose the best internet service provider in your area, how to select a plan that fits your family's needs. So we really understood that, Latino communities, especially those that are connecting for the first time, need support at every step along the way, not just enrolling in the emergency broadband benefit program, which is why we just launched EBB Para Mí, as well as this website, which you can access at ebbparami.org, also includes community outreach resources. We have 5x7 postcards that can be downloaded and printed online fairly inexpensively. We have social media infographics in both English and Spanish that you can post, that you can share, that you can tag us in. We'll be developing more digital resources along the way in the next weeks and months to come. And we want to do everything as possible to make it as easy as possible for all of our community advocates across the country to be able to point the Latino community to a reliable source of information from trusted leaders, offered in both English and Spanish in a way that's easy to understand. We also have videos in there, so it's not dependent on you being able to read through, I think, dense eligibility jargon and text on the website. There's videos, and we invite, actually, I want to take this moment to invite anybody that's joining. If you know or work for a local community organization, we want to invite you to a national bilingual town hall with Latino leaders happening on June 9th from 1 to 2 p.m. And we will be joined by Paloma Perez, who is the press secretary for the FCC, who will be there along with our friends from Telemundo to answer your questions in real time so that you know exactly how the ins and outs of the program and what support is available to you and to our community to get them connected. So thank you to Tony, thank you to Maria, and thank you to everybody on the call today for giving us the time to share this important resource. And I'll be sure to drop the link in the chat box if you guys have any questions. I'm also available at alejandro@http.org. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. I want you to send me this presentation. This is gold, seriously, for not just all the information that's in it, but for the ability that this gives us to reach out readily with really important nuggets of information to our elected officials, which is, again, something that we all have the capability to do. We have the voices, we have the platforms to do it. So let's use this great resource. Alejandro, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your voice. And next up, I want to introduce Juani Torres. Juani Torres is a community organizer with SA Stands. Thank you so much, Juani, for being here with us and for sharing your voice.
Thank you so much. And speaking of connectivity, I'm in my car at a Starbucks because my computer was not.
There you go.
So here we are. Well, my name is Juani Torres. Thank you for that introduction. I am a community organizer and a policy advisor with several groups here in San Antonio, but one of my dearest ones is SA Stands. And the reason for that is that we focus on our immigrant community, both documented and undocumented, as well as Spanish-speaking resident citizens of San Antonio. My story with digital connectivity is also personal. Like many of our speakers, growing up low income and first generation in San Antonio, I also spent many hours outside of parking lots applying to school. I remember in high school, I was a valedictorian, but I didn't understand what college was. And I applied to over 32 schools by sitting outside of parking lots at McDonald's. Back then, I didn't know what Starbucks was, but I remember spending so much time. And so when I graduated, I got the opportunity to go to Stanford University on a full ride. And after I graduated, I worked at Google. And at Google, my dearest goal was to how could we decrease that divide? How can we connect and bridge using all the privilege and all the resources that a tech company like Google had, and resources like employees who come from similar backgrounds and who care and have personal experience with this, to connect folks. And so we launched different partnerships, one of the most important ones being with the Mission Economic Development Agency in San Francisco. I realized that for many Googlers, especially Latino Googlers who were moving to the city, we were looking for community. And our community, meant that we were looking for other Latinos who, like us, had stories of an immigrant experience. And so what we did was use our Google resources, our Google funding, to bridge the gap by providing not only digital literacy classes in English and Spanish, but also the hardware, right? Because as we talked, it's not just about having access to the internet, which is a huge, huge barrier, but then it's also about having the computer, the laptop, the understanding on how to use this. Working at Google, we realized very quickly, and this was back in 2013, so it's almost 10 years ago, but really quickly that schools were moving from using Microsoft Word, or definitely no longer using floppy disks like I did, but actually using Google Drive and Google Docs and Google Slides and all these services that K through 12 students needed internet, but then they also needed a laptop or some sort of Chromebook or some sort of iPad to connect with their peers and do well academically. And so we worked together with partners like the Mission Economic Development Agency to provide digital literacy workshops in Spanish and English so that the students knew, but also the parents knew, and then so that they could receive the hardware and they could receive the internet access. Recognizing though that the problem is bigger than that, I decided to go to public policy school to actually work on how we can invest and change public policy, because so much of what I learned was that a lot of our communications and other legislation that affects the internet has not been updated in over 30 to 40 years. And so I decided to go to public policy school. And here in San Antonio, I've been working actually to help custodial staff at a lot of these companies and a lot of different schools learn how to use and access the internet and hardware and digital literacy in Spanish and in English, especially as we seek, to increase vaccination rates, as we seek to increase, before vaccinations were available, testing, and understand, the different ways that internet access and navigating the digital world impacts health and impacts things like naturalization and immigration services, impacts things like taxes, impacts things like folks getting their refund or their stimulus check. So through different work and different partnerships, I've been using my time at the LBJ School of Public Policy at UT Austin to bring together students, partner with organizations, partner with companies, and help increase that access and decrease the digital divide. So a lot of my work is kind of the intersection of first hand anecdotal experience with digital issues or internet connectivity issues, but then also the policy side. So that's a little bit more about what I'm up to here in Texas. We definitely need it. And it's not only, of course, folks in urban cities like San Antonio, but a lot of rural communities, a lot of our migrant workers, a lot of our folks that maybe live in the outskirts of these urban centers and have even less access to the internet and these services. So just wanted to make sure we remember that, because that is something that I'm proactively trying to focus on as well, is those communities that don't live in these cities. I mean, if the digital divide is bad in cities like San Antonio, 7th largest city in the US, I can only imagine in the other little towns that surround us, especially in a state like Texas. So yeah, that's more about myself, and I'll put my email in the chat. And if anybody has questions, anybody has visits to Texas, happy to support. And thank you all so much. I'm learning a lot about everything that everyone is up to all across the country. So thank you.
Juani, thank you so much for joining us and for squeezing in time for this, even if it's in your car. We appreciate your voice, You do so much for all of our communities, and we urge you to continue using that voice and to work with us to make sure, again, that we're all working towards the solve of not just bridging the digital divide and the homework gap, but getting rid of them altogether. So thank you again for being here with us today. We appreciate it. And next up, I am thrilled to be able to introduce Briana Castano, who is the National Director of STEM and Teach for America. Briana, thank you so much for being with us today, and we look forward to hearing your story.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so honored to be here with such other amazing and incredible panelists. So thank you for having me. I'm just going to talk to you guys a little bit about the digital divide in education specifically, and what I've seen both during my time at Teach for America and going back even a little further into my time as a school administrator before joining Teach for America. And if we could just head to the next slide, that would be great. So what we know right now is, number one, technology is more important than ever. And I say this not just because of what the pandemic has opened our eyes to, but even before the pandemic. As I mentioned, I was a school administrator in Austin, Texas, and every time we were planning our professional development for teachers, the number one question we would ask ourselves is, how are we going to prepare these educators to prepare our students for jobs that don't even exist yet? We are in the middle of a fourth industrial revolution. And, you know, there's all these crazy statistics about how our current sixth graders are going to have jobs that, you know, don't even exist yet. And so, because technology is advancing so rapidly, and that was always a question that was in front of our mind, is how are we going to prepare them for these jobs, knowing that technology is not going to slow down? And then the pandemic hit, and we saw that the importance of having access to technology, specifically the internet, became even more important. In the US, there was no other option. You either had access to the internet and you were able to continue with your education, or you were just going to experience a wider learning loss than what really is already a broken education system was probably going to create anyways. And I saw in other countries, there were, you know, they don't have the infrastructure that we have, but their innovation was far exceeding what I was seeing here in the States. And we had teachers on TV in Peru, and, you know, I have primas in Mexico who are teachers, and they were teaching through WhatsApp and through Facebook and going on the radio. And all these other countries had all these solutions to be able to give their students access to learning. And in the States, it just kind of felt like, well, you got to find a way to get internet. And that's where we see these pictures, these heartbreaking pictures of students in parking lots and, you know, in their cars, or you trying to type essays on their parents' cell phones. And it really wasn't a sustainable solution. And so at that point, I started to notice trends in these valiant efforts where communities were getting together, industries were coming together to try to solve some of these problems. And, you know, I saw there was a Sprint initiative where we were getting kids hotspots. And then that brought up some other issues because, you know, they didn't have where they lived, there was no infrastructure for those hotspots to actually receive any service. And it just really brought light to some of these issues that that certain students were having. The issues went beyond access to internet. The families didn't have access to digital tools or to digital literacy. And when the pandemic forced parents to be co-teachers, we saw those gaps just getting bigger and bigger and bigger because families weren't ready to prepare their students at home. So it obviously created this digital divide, which we're talking about today, that is just exacerbating gaps in education, gaps in career opportunities, and particularly for students who have been historically marginalized. And so we can head to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about what we can do both as educators and as a community. I think the first thing which this charla is helping to do is just to acknowledge this reality. It's real. Students don't have access to the tools that they need. And even though we've been moving forward, it's not where we're supposed to be yet. Every single student must have access to reliable broadband and must have access to digital literacy. The second is that I'm going to just give a plug as the director of STEM, that giving students access to a high quality STEM education is really going to help narrow those gaps. Not, we're talking about the digital divide, but they are going into jobs where they will have to be experts in the digital world, and STEM is going to give them those skills that will help build that strength in using digital tools and digital literacy. I also want to empower everybody to focus on community-wide efforts. And we saw all those funny memes where when kids were sent homes and schools were shut down about, oh my God, teachers should be making $1 million because it's so hard to educate students. And I mean, even I, as an educator, my husband is an educator, let me tell you, we were struggling to get our 8-year-old to do anything. And so I can only imagine what families with multiple children and families who don't have a background in education were feeling. We have all the necessary tools, and it was still very difficult. And so, as the saying goes, it takes a village, and it's going to take a village to close this digital gap as well. And the last little pitch that I will make is, as schools are reopening and as we're returning to normalcy, I really, really hope that we do not waste this opportunity to reinvent, particularly the educational experience. If all that comes out of this is, okay, well, now students have access to internet, I think that's great and that's fantastic and that needs to happen, but that's the bare minimum that needs to happen. This is an opportunity for us to completely rethink what education looks like, for us to think what community learning looks like, and for us to rethink what's possible for the future. So I will leave with that. I will also share in the chat an op-ed that I wrote regarding STEM education and how that provides the skills needed to help end this digital divide if anybody's interested in learning more. But again, thank you so much for having me. It's been great learning from everybody.
Briana, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. And I love that you have underscored the importance of STEM, and especially Latinas in STEM. We need more of that. There is no question. So thank you for your voice and for doing what you do. Next up, it is my pleasure to welcome a dear friend of mine and someone who has been so active in the area of healthcare for our community. He is the chairman of the board of United States of Care. He also is the founder of votercare.org, which had a very impactful role during the elections in terms of educating Latinos on healthcare as a priority voting issue. I'd like to welcome Dr. Molina. Dr. Molina, thank you so much for being here with us and for showing us that the issue of broadband, or the lack thereof, not only has an impact on education, which we have seen through everything that the speakers have talked about thus far, but it also has a tremendous impact and literally could be life or death on the issue of healthcare. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you, Maria. I mean, healthcare has changed profoundly in the course of this pandemic, and it's never going to go back to the way it was before. We have learned that we can do so much with the internet that we didn't realize before. Telemedicine has been around for years, but the adoption of it was slow. And that, I think, is going to be a permanent change. And the digital divide and the technology that we have has the potential to make life easier, make access to healthcare better and more reliable, but it also has the potential to exacerbate problems. So imagine that you don't have access to the internet. Now your access to healthcare has gotten worse, not better, and it's because of technology. Imagine, for example, that you're at home and you have diabetes, or you have high blood pressure, or maybe you develop back pain, or maybe you're pregnant and you need prenatal care. And I say, okay, go to the doctor. So you open the door and you look out, and there's no car, and there's no bus, and there's no train, and you don't have any way to get to the doctor. To make matters worse, off on the horizon, you can see the highway, but you can't get there. And even if I give you a car and say, drive in that direction, and you get to that highway, there may not be an on-ramp in your community. So you're really stuck. You have no way to access healthcare. And that is what the future is all about. You heard earlier in the introduction about how people couldn't get access to the vaccine because in order to get the vaccine, you needed to go online. Down in South Texas a few years ago, the state of Texas wanted to go with what's called electronic visit verification. So if we sent a nurse into your home to take care of you or your grandmother or someone, that person was supposed to go online and document that they were in the home to provide that care in order for Medicaid to pay for it. Well, in many parts of the Rio Grande Valley, the patients didn't have internet access. And so the nurses couldn't prove that they had been in the home. You can't prove you're in the home, you're not going to get paid. I don't know how many nurses are going to continue visiting someone if they're not going to be paid. So this is going to be an even bigger problem in the future as we depend more and more on the internet to provide services in the home. And there's no question that the place of care is changing. In the early 20th century, it was the hospital. In the latter part of the 20th century, we moved from the hospital to outpatient services, maybe at a hospital, maybe at a clinic, but it was no longer hospital focused. In the 21st century, healthcare is going to be focused on the home. It's going to rely heavily on technology and the internet. And people that don't have that kind of access are going to face barriers to getting care. Now, we've talked about there are initiatives underway to make this better and provide some relief. Well, that's fine. So I've run a road out to your house and I've given you a car. You have the means to get on the highway. But the bad news is it's temporary. And in a few years, we're going to tear up that road and take away your car. So a temporary solution to give people access to the internet is not going to be acceptable when it comes to healthcare. We need permanent solutions that will give everyone adequate access to the internet, not just the hardware. The tablets and the smartphones are great, but without the ability to access the internet and access your provider, your healthcare is going to be different and it's going to be worse than what everyone else gets. So it's an important issue and it's one that is not going to go away. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier about some of the problems with Latinos. The CDC has shown from their research that Blacks and Latinos are more than twice as likely to die from coronavirus after adjusting for age. Mm. So this is part of the problem. Access to care is critical.
Thank you so much, Dr. Molina. And we certainly want to make sure that everyone in our community has an on-ramp because it is, like you just described, an issue of life and death. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. Next up, I would love to introduce another dear friend, Brent Wilkes, who is the Senior Vice President for Institutional Development at the Hispanic Federation, and somebody that we have all known for a very, very long time, who has been a tremendous activist on so many issues and has been on the front lines fighting for our community as long as I can remember, having known him. So Brent, thank you so much for being here with us. You also have been one of the very early experts on the issue of broadband and telecommunications and technology in the Hispanic community. So your voice for so long has been invaluable. Thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Maria. It's great to be here with you on a Friday afternoon and, talking about my favorite subject, which is the digital divide and what we can do to address it. And I really appreciate being here. It's been my week of Hispanic Heritage Foundation activities because I was with Tony earlier.
I heard.
So that was a lot of fun. And now I'm here talking about another important topic on his Charla. So really appreciate that. And I just want to give a shout out to Jessica Rosenworcel, our chairwoman at the FCC, not just for her incredible leadership and for her presentation earlier, but the fact that she's staying on for the entire Charla to talk with us about this and listen to us, I think is just a testament. Maria, you know this, there are very few public servants that would spend this kind of time listening to diverse voices and talking about a topic like this. So thank you, Jessica, for doing this. So my favorite topic, of course, is the digital divide. And I think that all of our presenters have done an amazing job already discussing this. And what a pressing need it is and to address. And I think now more than ever, which is really the theme of this whole Charla, I wanted to really talk about a specific part of it, which is the digital skilling challenge in the workforce that we have, because things have really accelerated because of the pandemic. And if I can ask you to jump to the next slide, we at Hispanic Federation really focused in on disaster recovery during the pandemic. It's been a huge challenge for Latino communities across the country. So right away we jumped in and we started providing grants to Latino community-based organizations and to Latino small businesses to really, because since they're on the front lines helping people, we wanted to make sure that they had the resources to be able to serve the community in its greatest time of need. And have had a lot of success. We've been able to provide over $16 million in grants and donations to over 1,000 nonprofits and small businesses in 32 states and Puerto Rico. So really probably our largest ever recovery effort. We'll be giving out an additional $20 million this year to these organizations and small businesses to help them recover. So we're all in, we're working hard, trying to get folks vaccinated as we speak. But we also have been thinking about what do we need to do to be able to help the community recover for the long haul, as opposed to just kind of meeting the emergency needs of the pandemic. And if I can ask you to go to the next slide, we can kind of see some of the strategies. So we thought, people are going to, the unemployment rate went through the roof. Folks were going to need to get back to work, but the economy has changed dramatically since the pandemic began. And just as an example of this, the 6 largest tech companies on the S&P 500, on the 500 largest companies in the country, made up about 17% of the S&P 500 before the pandemic began. They're now up to 25% of the S&P 500, over $8 trillion in market capitalization. And so this is an increasingly accelerating sector of our economy. And everyone is really going to be able to, is going to need to develop their digital skill sets if they want to, be competitive going forward. And so this is, I think, a huge challenge for us because of that lack of connectivity and the fact that many Latinos haven't had a broadband connection to their home. There's a mismatch between the skill sets that Latino communities have now and what they're going to need to be successful in this new digital focused economy. So if I can turn to the next slide, what we did is we created a digital accelerator, which we thought would work with our community-based organizations, 24 Latino-led community-based organizations who are doing workforce development already. We wanted to really work with them to skill up and to focus on these digital tech skills to help them be successful. And so we provided them with funding to open laboratories to be able to teach classes on digital skilling and to really reach folks who were looking for work or were wanting to move up. So they were in an occupation where they felt like they wanted to grow and to be able to expand their skill set so they could get a better job. And so those are really the target markets. And of course, this is often the toughest folks to teach digital skilling to, because they're out of work, they're struggling to put food on the table, very stressed, but they know that they need to pick up some additional skills to be able to get back into that workforce. So we partnered with these organizations, again, 10 states and Puerto Rico. We had over 6,000 people taking these classes during the pandemic, much of it virtual, unfortunately, but then some increasingly now we've been able to switch to a hybrid model and teach in-person classes, and we expect that to be the trend going forward. 89% of the folks that we've been able to serve were Latino, and then we've had a lot of success in being able to place these folks back into work. So all in all, a big success, but a drop in the bucket compared to what needs to be done to be able to skill folks up. If I could ask you to go to the next slide. And so we were thinking, do we want to teach beginner classes, intermediate classes, or advanced classes? And we decided we needed to do all three because regardless of where you are in this spectrum, the need for digital skilling is really strong. For example, if you're in a job that you weren't really using a lot of digital skills, some of these beginner classes are really helpful to teach you the components of using a computer, how to search, how to write your resume, how to do professional email etiquette. These are the types of skills that many employers are now really requiring that didn't require those before. And so we wanted to make sure that we had classes for those folks. And then people who wanted to kind of move over to that intermediate level, which is working with office products like Excel and Word, using IT networking and actually learning how to connect computers together, and doing digital skill sets for specific presentations. We started offering those classes as well. And then I think as Tony has championed with Hispanic Heritage Foundation, we also wanted to make sure that we had classes that focused on teaching advanced skills. So programming languages, software development, really helping prepare folks for the working for some of the top tech companies in the country. And so we offer this full spectrum of classes. Not everybody takes every level of class, but we've really had a lot of luck helping people skill up depending on where they are in the spectrum. And if I could go to the next slide. And so, why is this important? Despite the efforts that many of us have made over the years, there's still a strong need for helping teach digital skill sets to Latinos. 32% of the Latino community reports having no digital skill sets at all, and then 25% have limited digital skills. And so these are really the areas that we're focusing on. About half of the community that really needs these skill sets to be able to compete in an economy that's increasingly digital. Next slide. So a lot of our focus on these skill sets is looking at language barriers. We know that teaching digital skills in Spanish is often not available. All of our 24 locations have been able to teach a bilingual curriculum, so they have both English and Spanish available. And then, of course, we know that the community is also looking for skill sets that can help them grow in these underrepresented areas where Latinos are really underrepresented in the workforce. So this is a big focus, I think, for as we're going forward. We're really shifting into ensuring that we have the ability to do hybrid classes. But in addition to doing the hybrid classes, we have provided laptops and hotspots to these organizations so that they can connect folks up remotely and teach the courses. And our goal is to continue to work with more and more of our Latino community-based organizations to really look at the next phase of what we think the COVID recovery is going to take, which is helping people get prepared to re-enter the workforce and have that skill sets that they need to be successful. And I believe that's the end of my presentation. If you can go to the next slide, that's it. But happy to be on this panel. Obviously, we're very supportive of the emergency broadband benefit. We do want to see a permanent broadband benefit. If people say that we can't afford to do this, I think it's important to point them back to say, look, at 25% of the S&P 500 is just 6 tech companies. It's $8 trillion. We really can't afford not to connect our community up to the most important technology that's powering our economy and going forward. So this is an imperative that is something that we think is not something that we can ignore. And if you do ignore it, you're really shooting yourself in the foot, because our economy is so dependent on this technology, and the Latino population is providing an increasingly larger share of our workforce, that if we don't provide them with the skill sets that they need to be successful, our economy is going to suffer in the long term. So appreciate the time and looking forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much, Brent. And you're absolutely right that this has got to be a priority. It's not an issue of the richest country in the world not having the resources. It's an issue of priorities. So I know that's what everyone on this panel and on this Zoom is working to make sure that those priorities are front and center for all of our leaders. Thank you for your voice, and thank you for being here today. I want to now turn it over to Alexis Jones. Alexis Jones is an alumni leader, Pathways to Power. Alexis, thank you so much for being here. We look forward to what you have to say.
Hi, thank you so much for having me and giving youth a voice at this table. I'm a rising sophomore at Cornell University, and I'll be representing Pathways to Power. It's a student-led gun violence intervention group based in Washington, D.C., out of Ward 8. And I'm just going to provide a little bit of my own experience, high school and college perspective, and a little bit of community advocacy. Next slide, please. Toward the end of my senior year, when COVID really hit the US, my school luckily had access to laptops for all students, but students having Wi-Fi was still a large issue. In addition to shaky Wi-Fi or no connection at all, students' mental health declined and willingness to learn went down with it. And at a higher institution, things didn't look that much better. Lower income students and first generation students pushed and fought to come to campus only not to have access to a laptop. I was shocked to see that there were only around 100 laptops available for long-term rental at Cornell University. One of my peers wasn't able to get a computer for 3 weeks. They only received one because their computer science professors were tired of them asking for extensions and decided to submit an urgent request to Cornell IT. Students eligible for CARES Act may have had an easier time requesting funds toward technology, but this information was not readily available. I had to go through multiple websites to even find out this information. Then students who stayed home and didn't have a home broadband connection were left out of the conversation completely. I know some of my peers had to take semester off for issues such as this. Cornell has been pursuing the Internet of Things, which is a connectivity across devices, but are forgetting to use their allocated budget towards broadband expansion and access to readily available computers for all students. On the community organizing front, access to sponsors that were usually met at events has practically disappeared for us as a small organization, but violence has still been increasing in our most at risk and marginalized communities, paired with the inability to physically mobilize. So as we turn to virtual engagement, we see that our reach has diminished. The same youth that didn't feel heard prior to COVID feel even less heard now. We need broadband, more equitable access to technology, and as others have voiced, a reimagining of education because the conversation is not over. And the next slide, please. And that's really all I have. Thank you for allowing me the chance to speak.
Thank you so much, Alexis. Please keep doing what you're doing. We need voices like yours to keep us all honest, make sure that our leaders know what's at stake. So thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, I'm going to turn it over to another dear friend of mine and longtime small business leader in Adams Morgan. And her name is Ana Reyes, and she is the owner of El Tamarindo Restaurant, a beloved institution in Adams Morgan and frankly in Washington, D.C. And if anyone has not gone to El Tamarindo to taste their food, I have one word for you to describe their food: yum-ola. So you must go. Ana, thank you so much for being here and for lending us your voice and your perspective on this issue of access to broadband.
Thank you so much, Maria. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so happy to be learning about what everybody's doing for our community and doing everything that we can to get our community close to where we need to be so that we don't fall even further behind than we have. But I do want to talk a little bit about how the pandemic affected us as a small business. There was a huge, initially with the shutdown where we weren't allowed to serve customers, the pandemic forced us to rely incredibly heavily on technology in order to stay visible to our customers, to stay accessible and to stay engaged, right? People are online, ordering online. If you're not on certain platforms, you're pretty much invisible. And, you know, for us, events and just kind of engaging with our customers here at the restaurant has always been huge. And that's how we've been able to stay connected and kind of have our customers become part of the El Tamarindo culture. Obviously, with COVID, we were not able to do that. So relying on social media and, you know, virtual events, we were doing virtual pupusa making workshops, which was a lot of fun. It was a wonderful way of connecting with our customers and just keeping that relationship, right? So I think that clearly it was very, very, very important for us to have reliable access to broadband. And it made me think about the smaller mom and pop shops that maybe had a very basic website that didn't have online ordering, or don't have reliable internet, or don't even, maybe they don't know the importance of it, and how far back they might fall behind if they don't have access to this or are aware of how the importance of it. And as an, El Tamarindo being an example, my parents are, immigrants that came without, my mom had very little education. My dad never had proper schooling. Through hard work, they were able to build a restaurant. We're now we've been here for almost 40 years. They've been able to give their children education, that whole story, the American dream. And there's hundreds of immigrant families that have been able to start their small businesses and provide better opportunities for their lives. And having access to a reliable internet is crucial for that, for these mom and pops. There's going to, the same way that there's that huge gap between the children who had help at school or had access to broadband, there's a huge gap for those small businesses that either didn't have access, or they weren't implementing certain programs because they weren't aware or didn't have access to the internet. So I think it's incredibly important for small businesses as well in our Latino community, just because Latinos, we're hard workers. Well, we put in the work, and we push forward and we make it happen. But there's certain things that the pandemic has shown us that we absolutely have to have a strong broadband connection in order to be able to execute any programs or new things that we have to implement into our businesses. I wanted to mention also the labor shortage. With the labor shortage, we have been, so sorry, I am still working.
No worries, we know what it's like.
With the labor shortage, we have, like every other restaurant throughout the country, we've experienced, it's been very difficult, and as people have exited the labor force for various different reasons. We're implementing a program where we're, the customer is able to order off of their phones instead of through their server, right? We just, again, relying more heavily on technology and that strong connection, right? The internet connection. But it also made me think about those mothers that exited the labor force, and a lot of them are doing side hustles. Whatever service you were providing before or product, a lot of them are now offering it through Facebook or and again, it goes back to business and small business, right? Being able to, Latinos, we figure it out.
Yeah.
But providing that tool, having access to reliable internet, I think would really make a big difference in those mothers, those these women who have exited the workforce, and just kind of creating another avenue for them online that would allow them to take care of their families and create income and stability, and yeah.
Which they wouldn't be able to do if they didn't have broadband access, right?
Exactly. So
thank you so much, Ana. We really appreciate your being here and giving us your important perspective from a small business standpoint, and frankly, the downright economics of what having a broadband connection really mean to our community. I really want to thank everybody, but I especially want to thank Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel for hanging with us and for really hearing so many perspectives. And in fact, Jessica, I want to give you a chance to comment on everything that you've heard today. I'm sure it's really nothing new, but I love how you are always, as Brent said, you know, you're sticking with us, and we really appreciate it. We hope you learned a little bit more that you can then take back and use in your everyday advocacy, not just for our community, but for all communities who do need this access to broadband because of what it means to our everyday lives. So I want to turn it over to you.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Listen, there's a lot of old friends on this gathering. Maria, Brent, Tony, Adan, I mean, but a lot of new ones too. And here's what I hope as we head into this weekend, that we remember it's been a tough year, an awful year. And the Latino community has been hit harder than most. But we have an opportunity right now to take this crisis and build something good out of it. We have programs like we've never had before to help households get connected like we've never done before. And I hope you can be a part of it, because I hope that we can look back a year hence and say that we took a community that was disconnected, not just from broadband and technology, but from opportunity. And we found a way to get them online, seek out new opportunities, and recover from what the last year has delivered. I hope you stay in touch with my office. I feel like we're never going to get to 100% broadband in this country if we do not connect Latino households. We're never going to get to digital age opportunity if we don't connect Latino households. So I hope we can continue to work together. There's good to be done. I'm impatient. I want it done tomorrow, but I know that if we keep working together, we're going to get it done anyway. So thank you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful long weekend.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for being such a true ally and partner with us. And we will take you up on it. You will be hearing from us. You know you will. So we appreciate that. Gracias, everyone. Go and have a safe and relaxing holiday. We will be back at you next week, and we have a lot of work to do. Thank you for everyone's advocacy and for everything that you do every day for our community. Muchas gracias. Ciao, ciao. Thank you.